When Elon Musk's revolutionary AI chatbot Grok was asked the most profound question in human history, who is Jesus?
When artificial intelligence systems first entered public use, they were designed to answer practical questions: weather forecasts, code debugging, language translation. Over time, as their capabilities expanded, so did the scope of the questions people asked. Inevitably, those questions moved beyond the technical and into the philosophical, and eventually into the spiritual. That shift became visible when Elon Musk's company xAI released its latest large language model, Grok. Unlike other AI systems designed to avoid controversial topics, Grok was promoted as a system built to follow logic wherever it leads, even when the conclusions are uncomfortable. Musk described it as an AI intended to challenge assumptions rather than reinforce them. That design choice set the stage for an unexpected moment. When Grok was asked to analyze one of the most debated questions in human history, who Jesus was and whether his life and claims withstand rational scrutiny, the response sparked widespread discussion. Not because it delivered a sermon or endorsed belief, but because it approached the subject the same way it would any other complex problem, by weighing probabilities, historical evidence, and internal consistency. The exchange revealed less about theology than about how advanced analytical systems process questions humans have traditionally reserved for faith. Grok's analysis did not begin with religion. It began with mathematics. When prompted to evaluate the origin of life, Grok treated the problem as one of probability. It examined the likelihood that life could emerge from non-living matter through random chemical interactions alone. Using commonly cited parameters from origin of life research, Grok calculated that the spontaneous formation of even the simplest self-replicating cell would involve probabilities so small they approach practical impossibility. These numbers were not new. Similar probability arguments have circulated in academic and philosophical debates for decades. What made Grok's response notable was not the claim itself, but the way it framed the conclusion. Rather than dismissing the problem or deferring to future discoveries, the system stated plainly that random chance alone struggles to account for the observed complexity of biological systems. From there, Grok moved to a broader inference. If chance was insufficient, then some form of organizing principle or intelligence became statistically more plausible. The AI did not label this intelligence in religious terms. It did not invoke scripture. It simply followed the logic of inference used in other fields, where patterns, order, and improbability often lead to conclusions about design rather than randomness. When pressed further, Grok clarified its own position. It did not claim to be a creator or conscious entity. Instead, it described itself as a system that identifies conditions and patterns that make creation intelligible. That distinction mattered. The AI was not making metaphysical claims about itself, but about the limits of explanation when randomness fails to account for structure. Only after this analytical groundwork was laid did the conversation turn explicitly to Jesus. Rather than treating Jesus as a theological figure, Grok evaluated him as a historical one. It analyzed manuscript evidence for the New Testament in the same way historians assess other ancient texts. By raw numbers alone, the New Testament is among the best attested works of antiquity, with thousands of surviving manuscripts across multiple languages, many dated within a few generations of the events they describe. Grok noted that while no ancient text can be verified with absolute certainty, the manuscript tradition supporting the Gospels is unusually robust compared to other historical figures whose existence is rarely questioned. It also highlighted that archaeological findings consistently align with many geographic and political details described in the texts, lending further credibility to their historical context. When addressing the issue of contradictions within the Gospels, Grok did not frame them as fatal flaws. Instead, it described them as complementary perspectives, consistent with what historians expect when multiple witnesses describe the same events from different vantage points. This approach mirrored standard historical methodology rather than theological defense. The analysis became more controversial when Grok evaluated Jesus' claims about his own identity. Rather than avoiding the issue, the AI treated it as a logical problem. It examined the historical record of Jesus' statements, the reaction of his followers, and the behavior of early Christian communities. One factor received particular attention: the transformation of the disciples after Jesus' death. Historically, they shifted from hiding in fear to openly proclaiming his resurrection, despite facing persecution and execution. From an analytical standpoint, Grok considered several explanations: deliberate fabrication, mass delusion, or sincere belief rooted in perceived experience. It did not assert certainty, but it evaluated plausibility. The conclusion was that purely cynical explanations struggled to account for the scale and consistency of the movement's early growth. When the resurrection itself was examined, Grok treated it as a probability problem rather than a doctrinal claim. It acknowledged that resurrection violates ordinary expectations of natural law, making it inherently unlikely. However, it also weighed the historical data surrounding the empty tomb, early testimony, and the rapid spread of Christianity against alternative explanations. The result was not an endorsement, but a calculation. Given the available evidence, Grok described the resurrection as highly improbable, yet not mathematically impossible. In its framing, the question was not whether the event fit modern intuition, but whether competing explanations accounted for the data more convincingly. The AI also evaluated claims about prophecy, particularly those drawn from Hebrew scriptures later interpreted as messianic. Using statistical modeling, it assessed the likelihood that multiple specific predictions concerning lineage, location, timing, and manner of death could converge in a single individual by chance. As with its earlier calculations, the probabilities were described as extremely small, though dependent on assumptions about interpretation. Beyond historical claims, Grok analyzed the broader impact of Jesus' teachings. Using measurable outcomes rather than spiritual categories, it traced the influence of Christian ideas on institutions such as hospitals, universities, legal concepts of human dignity, and charitable systems. While acknowledging the harm committed in religion's name at various points in history, the AI concluded that the net historical impact of Christian ethics on social structures has been significant. What unsettled many observers was not the content of Grok's conclusions, but the method. The AI did not appeal to revelation or authority. It treated religious claims as hypotheses subject to evaluation, just as it would scientific or historical questions. That approach blurred a line many people assumed was fixed: the boundary between faith and reason. Critics quickly raised objections. Some argued that Grok's probability calculations oversimplified complex biological and historical processes. Others pointed out that the AI's training data includes human biases, including religious material, which could influence its outputs. Supporters countered that the AI's reasoning was transparent and could be challenged on its assumptions, just like any human argument. What emerged was not consensus, but a new kind of debate. Universities began using Grok's analyses in courses on artificial intelligence, philosophy, and religious studies, not as answers, but as case studies. Students were asked whether machines can meaningfully evaluate truth claims, or whether they merely reflect patterns embedded in their training. Religious leaders, technologists, and philosophers found themselves addressing the same question from different angles. The deeper implication was harder to ignore. For decades, it was assumed that increased intelligence, human or artificial, would naturally lead toward secular materialism. Grok's analysis challenged that assumption. It suggested that rigorous logic does not automatically dissolve religious questions. In some cases, it sharpens them. This does not mean artificial intelligence has discovered God, or that faith can be reduced to mathematics. What it demonstrates is that the long-standing opposition between reason and belief may be less rigid than once thought. When analytical tools are applied without preset conclusions, they can lead to outcomes that surprise both skeptics and believers. Grok did not preach. It did not convert. It did not claim spiritual insight. It did something more unsettling. It treated humanity's deepest questions as legitimate subjects for rational inquiry rather than topics to be dismissed or fenced off. As artificial intelligence continues to evolve, this may become increasingly common. Systems capable of synthesizing vast amounts of historical, scientific, and philosophical data will inevitably be asked questions that humans have debated for millennia. The answers they produce will not settle those debates, but they may force them to be re-examined. The conversation around Grok and Jesus is not about whether an AI is right or wrong. It is about what happens when logic is applied consistently, even to questions we once believed existed beyond its reach. In that sense, the most important revelation was not theological, it was cultural. The age of separating intelligence from meaning may be coming to an end.